as well as a copy of the slides in your inbox after the webinar is completed. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, I'd like to give you just a little bit of background about who we are before we get started. KirkpatrickPrice is a licensed CPA firm in PCI QSA, providing assurance services to clients worldwide. Our firm has over 14 years of experience in information assurance by performing assessments, audits, and tests that strengthen information security and compliance controls. We offer information security services such as audits and pen testing, as well as readiness and guidance on frameworks such as SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC for cybersecurity, PCI DSS, HIPAA, High Trust CSF, FISMA, ISO, GDPR, and various other data privacy frameworks. We'd also like to encourage you to connect with us by subscribing to our blog for regular industry tips, updates, and best practices. We're typically posting about 3 times a week. You can also visit our library of recorded webinars so that you can check out any series at any time, including this one if you haven't seen the other 2 already. And you can check out our free video resources and subscribe to our YouTube channel or connect with us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And just another quick reminder, we will have time for questions at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to submit them using the GoToWebinar toolbar on your screen. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. Joseph is the founder and president of KirkpatrickPrice. He holds quite a few certifications and specializes in data security, IT governance, and regulatory compliance. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Joseph so he can get the presentation started.
All right. Thank you very much, Ashlyn. Thanks for joining today, everyone, and appreciate everyone's participation in this webinar series that we've been doing. And we're going to talk about leveraging the internal and external audit functions to their best and most optimum use. And the things that I want to accomplish today is make sure that everyone who attends here understands the role and best use of internal audit to support your compliance initiatives. I want us to appreciate the strengths and weaknesses of both internal and external auditors, I should say. And then I want to talk a little bit about things that I've seen in the industry where internal audit needs some additional support and additional tools in order to deal with today's issues and all the inspection that we want and expect them to look at. And then finally, we'll close out today with talking about how to select and leverage an external auditor who is aligned with you and is able to enhance your compliance mission. And first of all, I want to start off with just a little bit about auditors. I feel like I have to make this appeal to the world out there that auditors, we're people. And, you know, sometimes we get this complex that people hate us and people feel like they're going to the dentist when they work with their auditor. But I want you to understand we have hopes, we have dreams, just like you do. We have family members who love us. I've only met a few auditors who, you know, really the world had completely rejected. But we have emotions. We bleed just like you do. And so understanding that auditors are people and we don't need to hate them, we need to appreciate them. And I hope that this presentation today will remind us about why auditors are necessary and what good they do for us today. I know for me, you know, I love auditing. I feel like I was put on this earth to audit. I've always had just an innate ability to do this, and I just find things, you know, that other people don't find. And I don't know why that is, but I have just always gravitated to it. And so I love auditors and I love working with them and helping them. And I feel like the auditing that I've been able to do over the years with our clients has been helpful. I believe that I've helped people and businesses and, you know, done some important things with that. But one of the stories that stands out for me that I always tell is I was on an audit one time and I was comparing the employee list with the access control list to their network. And there was this one name that stood out, and it was Pavel Dvorak. And he was a domain administrator in Active Directory. And he wasn't on the employee list. And so I went to the VP of Operations office, and I said, hey, I was reviewing a sampling of employees against your network access controls, and I don't know who this administrator is here. And he said, oh, he is a former employee, doesn't work here any longer. And so, yeah, we'll get that removed. So I was like, okay. So, just a finding that I shared. And probably an hour or two later, we were doing a walkthrough in another part of the building. And I walked into this big room, and it was just filled with cubicles. There was a ton of people in there. And I just randomly picked one person to walk over because I was in there to observe some things dealing with the workstations and the access controls, physically to the devices. And I walked over to a desk and I said, hi, I'm Joseph Kirkpatrick. And he turned and shook my hand and he said, hi, my name is Pavel Dvorak. And so out of all the people I could have talked to, I picked the one guy that the VP of Operations had just told me didn't work there. And so it was just one of those moments, and I've had dozens of those where I don't know why I found the one person who was the exception to the control that they said that they had in place. But I love auditing, and that's I'm doing what I enjoy doing, and hopefully an auditor that you love out there somewhere. But let's talk a little bit about the role of internal audit. And I'm going to refer us on a few slides here to some text from the Institute of Internal Auditors. I'm not a member of this organization. I'm not a certified internal auditor, but they define internal auditing as an independent, objective assurance and consulting activity designed to add value and improve an organization's operations. It helps an organization accomplish its objectives by bringing a systematic, disciplined approach to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of risk management, control, and governance processes. And you'll see on your screen there that this definition has a few important words that I want to highlight as we look at the definition here. First of all, consulting. Internal audit is not only an independent and objective activity, but it's also possible for an internal auditor to consult and add value and help to improve a business's operations. It helps an organization because it brings a system to you, and that's a benefit to us when we are able to start getting things systematized and working effectively like that. That's very helpful to our companies to be able to have that, and internal auditors can help bring that system and that discipline. Discipline is something that produces long-term effects. Discipline is what builds momentum and helps us as organizations get more efficient. And of course, with all the different threats and risks that we have in our organizations, it's important to evaluate and improve what we're doing. I'm afraid sometimes that our audits become routine, and we've made them routine, and we've made them just the same as last year, and we don't adjust and we don't take into account the new things that need to be evaluated and improved, because it's all about ultimately being more effective. And in their definition here, if internal audit is responsible for helping to make risk management more effective and controls more effective and governance processes more effective, then that's a very, very important thing to be doing. And that's why internal auditors are very valuable to all of our organizations. And so I want to key in on that first part of the definition there, independence and objectivity, and talk a little bit about why that's part of internal audit and why we need to understand really the importance of doing that. First of all, being impartial and unbiased in what we're doing as internal auditors is very, very important. It's a necessity. I'm a CPA, and in the various state laws that are out there that govern CPAs, when you're doing attestations, you're required by the law to maintain your independence and objectivity. And so it doesn't need to be in a contract somewhere. My profession requires me to maintain this impartiality. And if you go back to the beginning of these things being established, it's from the Great Depression, when some things happened with our financial markets that were a result of auditors and advisors not doing things in the best interest of society, really. And then you fast forward to the Enron scandal, it was the same thing, and new rules went into place after that because auditors were not being impartial and unbiased, even though those were the rules, and the rules were being skirted. And so if we don't have independence and objectivity as auditors, then we really can't fulfill the role that we're supposed to be filling as an organization. And so one of the things that we do in our audits is we want to see the organizational chart. And sometimes people are like, what's the point of looking at this? It's just one of those needless tasks that needs to be checked off the list when we're going through our audit. But what we're looking for there is where internal audit or any other function that needs to remain independent, where does that report to? So, for example, on the accounting side of the house, you really don't want your reporting to be mixed with your recording, and you don't want that to be mixed with your payables, because if you've got one person who's responsible for paying and recording and reporting, there's a likelihood that some fraud is going to occur because that person has too much ability to impact the checkbook and the funds, and they can hide what they're doing. And so you carve out recording and reporting from the payables function so that that's reported a different way, so that the two areas can be independently looked at, and you can determine if everything is accurate and if everything matches up. And that's one way that you discover fraud or improper activity or just mistakes by doing that. And so on the IT and security and compliance side of the house, it's a similar thing. When we look at this org chart, we want to see, where do people report? If I see on an org chart that the IT manager is also carrying the title of information security officer, and that's very common, I see that a lot, that might be a concern, because the IT manager might be a domain administrator and might be able to do some things and have a lot of control over adding accounts and deleting data and stopping logs and doing things like that. But if that person also is wearing the hat of information security officer, that role is supposed to be watching for things like that and reporting those kinds of things to the board. So an org chart is very telling about how you've structured it. Do you have that separated? And I know today we've got big companies on the webinar and we've got small companies, and I want to try to address both worlds without slanting too much of this one way or the other. But in a small organization where you don't have the roles, you don't have the people to be able to divide these things up, you have to really take a hard look at your org chart and ask yourself, where do I want to put this oversight function, and who is that person going to report to? Because it needs to be separate from the operational person who's actually doing the things, and try not to mix that. It is appropriate in a small organization like that who's maybe struggling with that issue to have dual reporting roles. This maybe on a day-to-day basis you're reporting to the COO, but you do have a dotted line to the board of directors or the audit committee or what have you. And whenever you see audit committee in the webinar today, I understand that a lot of smaller non-public companies will not have audit committees, but at that point you do want to ask, who are the board members, who are the shareholders of the organization? Those are the people who really need to be overseeing these independent functions, and they need to be getting the reporting and direct communication from internal audit, someone who's serving in that internal audit or oversight role. And, the last point here, the audit committee or the board or ownership, they should be responsible for appointing, removing, and compensating this auditor role. And let me give you a couple of examples of this. And I see this getting mixed up a lot. Sometimes there will be someone in an independent role who is reporting to a VP who has operational responsibility. And as much as we try, there's going to be some partiality there, because if the internal auditor is bringing up an issue that is going to affect the VP of operations paycheck, because that person is comped on productivity and output and profitability and things like that. And if they start perceiving that this person that reports to them is bringing up things that is slowing them down and, just causing red tape, and, they're annoyed by that, if this independent role starts feeling that their supervisor has control over their advancement and their termination and their compensation, then that's where independence can really be compromised. And so that's why there needs to be either a dual reporting role or have that structured very differently. But even in big organizations, you will find, if you ask internal auditors what the number one threat to their profession is, it's the internal reliance that we develop on operations, because we need to have a good working relationship with operations. We're both working towards the same goals. We have to share information. We have to work together. And even in big organizations, this is a problem where the audit committee is a little bit displaced from what's going on the day-to-day with our audits, and the internal auditor can start feeling compromised in their independence because of the relationship between them and operations. And we're going to look at that a little bit more as we go today. But this structure right here is very important and something that you need to really look at. And so I want to now talk about objectivity. Objectivity is really a state of mind. This says that the code of the profession requires an auditor to maintain objectivity and integrity, remain free from conflicts of interest, and not knowingly misrepresent facts. And so we are people, as I started off with, we're going to be subjective in our approach. That's just a fact. And so objectivity in the training that you take and the ethics requirements that are out there, it reminds you that you have to put yourself in a state of mind to ask yourself, am I being objective? And you compare your conclusions with what someone else in a similar position with a similar amount of experience to you, would they come to the same conclusion that you're coming to, being objective? And so am I being compromised in some way? Is there some kind of conflict of interest? Again, economically, we can be impacted there if it's something that, we're starting to feel the pressure of the operational people aren't happy, and, that's creating a conflict for me. But also there might be things like a family relationship, or just a history with that person. Maybe we have worked together for 20 years and there's been a lot of history going on there that can impact objectivity. And certainly a family relationship is something that can affect that too. And so you have to watch those conflicts of interest in order to properly serve the role in internal audit. And so the code of professional conduct here for internal auditors from the Institute of Internal Auditors has 4 sections I wanted to share with you today. Internal auditors must refrain from assessing specific operations for which they were previously responsible. After the Enron scandal and the new PCAOB rules went into effect, a lot of rules around this type of thing were developed in order to maintain independence and maintain objectivity. For example, you would have an auditor with an external audit firm, and maybe they would get hired by the publicly traded company. Well, now you have a cooling off period where you can't do that. You can't bring somebody directly in, and vice versa. You can't have somebody who has been with a client who gets hired by the audit firm and then they start auditing the place where they used to work. That's disallowed. And so these rules are there to maintain that objectivity. The second one is assurance engagements for functions over which the chief audit executive has responsibility must be overseen by a party outside of the internal audit activity. And so what the second one refers to is, do not call them a chief audit executive in your organization, but whoever it is who is responsible for some type of oversight, whether it's security or accounting or what have you, if there needs to be an audit over any part of that they're responsible for, that's when ownership, whether it's the board or the shareholders, they need to know that, well, our internal auditor can't do that because they have a conflict of interest in having that. That's where we have to bring in an external auditor. And so that's the second one. The third one is one that I wanted to point out here, which is internal auditors may provide consulting services relating to operations for which they had previous responsibilities. We get a lot of questions about this. Can the auditor, internal or external, have any say at all? They'll say, oh, well, that's a conflict of interest because this internal auditor is the one that told us that we should put that control in, and so now they can't audit that. And that's not the case. The rules do allow an auditor to consult or guide. It really just draws the line on implementation. There was a Big Four auditor in Europe that was fined millions of dollars last year because the auditor had recommended an accounting software to them. He had designed the system for them, and he participated in implementing it. And so at that point, he should have recused himself from auditing that environment. But he didn't, and it created this sense of lack of independence and objectivity. And so they were fined as a result of violating that. But it is okay to guide and consult. The line that we don't cross is implementing those things. And then finally, the last point here is if internal auditors have potential impairments to independence or objectivity relating to proposed consulting services, disclosure must be made to the engagement client prior to accepting the engagement. We had a situation recently where we discovered that our auditor was the brother-in-law of the CEO of the company that we were auditing. And he wasn't the current CEO, he had been a past CEO. And this came to light. And so what do? What's the ethical thing to do? Are you supposed to go, well, he's been gone for a few years and it doesn't seem to be any, because we talked to the auditor and he was like, oh, I have no issues with being objective. I'm not close with my brother-in-law and, all those kinds of things. But we disclosed it to the client because we wanted to ensure that didn't create an issue for them. And so these are just some rules that relate to independence and objectivity. And, there are ethics hotlines and places like that where your person who is in internal audit can call and ask a third party about anything that's facing them, because sometimes it's hard to know, can I, as an internal auditor, play on the company softball team with operational leaders that I'm auditing? Yes, you can do that. Can that operational person buy me a country club membership so that we can play golf together year round? No, you can't do that. And so there are things like that sometimes people want to ask for help on, but maintaining that independence and objectivity is critical to the role of internal and external auditing. So let's talk a little bit now about how to optimize these internal audit roles within your organization. According to the Institute of Internal Auditors, it says that a board who must steer the organization effectively must receive timely, accurate information about the organization's many strategic, operational, financial, and compliance risks, as well as assurance that the risks are being well managed. And so I would ask you, if you have an internal audit function today within your organization, take a fresh look at it and ask yourself, are they responsible for strategic areas, for operational, financial, and compliance? Internal audit is very broad, and the board needs this support. They need the eyes and the ears and the hands and the feet on the street looking into these things, so that some good, solid, direct communication can come from the internal audit function to the board. And so, are they being used in the best way? Because it should be a very comprehensive action that internal audit is taking. And you want to use these people for that. You don't want to marginalize them for just checking entries in our books, or, collecting low-level IT control documentation. You want to optimize them by using them for some of these board-related issues. It's, if it's a formal board of directors, or if it's just the ownership of the company, those are the people, those are the stakeholders that are being served by internal audit. And so you want to optimize them by making sure that they're covering all of these areas. The next definition I have here that I think points out how we need to use our internal auditors is that they can save their organization substantial amounts of money and protect its reputation in the marketplace by identifying operating inefficiencies, wasteful spending, employee theft, fraud, and cases of noncompliance with laws or regulations, for example. And it depends on what kind of industry you're in. But if you're a smaller type of company that hasn't brought in an internal audit function yet, you might say, this is just added cost to our organization. We can't afford to have this role that's doing internal audit. But look at the type of industry that you're in. Where are the inefficiencies? Where is the fraud? Where is the theft? Where is the potential for fines due to non-compliance? Those are the areas where you justify having that internal audit role. And for the bigger companies that do have that mature internal audit department within their companies, you should look at, are these people being targeted towards these areas? Because this is really where you can optimize their use and see the ROI on what's happening, because anytime an internal auditor can be that last line of defense to identify something that's inefficient or something that could potentially produce a fine, you're going to save the organization money, and that really justifies having that role right there. And so look at how it's structured, look at the people that you have, the skill sets that they have, and what their responsibilities are, what you've given them to do, because that's an area that we need to make more important in our environments. I want to look at some of the backgrounds that internal auditors should have. They should be focused on risk management. That's a big one right there. It's the wheel of risk management. You start off with assessment, and you identify and rank your risks, and you put controls in place. You monitor those controls. That's the role right there of internal audit, when they monitor and then audit the effectiveness of those controls, and then you adjust the program in order to come back around to assessment again. And so that's where, just in that function right there, an internal auditor can stay very busy in ensuring that what you're doing on a day-to-day basis is aligned with the risks that your organization is facing. And so if your person isn't doing that right now, or if you don't have a person in that role doing that, I encourage you to look at someone like that helping with risk management, because that's where a lot of inefficiency and waste can be identified and things can be streamlined to help the company. That in turn speaks back to corporate governance, because the board is supposed to be overseeing all those things. But how can they when they're not in the business every day? And that's why they have to have that counterpart internally to collect and document and report on a regular basis. Then you have organizational objectives. Maybe there is a task or a mission that your company is gearing up for, and that's where you bring internal audit in. How can we get them to service in this and help us be disciplined and systematic in our approach and the changes that we're making, or the accomplishment of this objective that we have. Operational efficiency and effectiveness. That's one of the beauties of an internal auditor, is that they're your auditor, and they know you, and they know your people and your systems, and they know your industry and where you're going. And so this role has to include that in their focus, because they're going to care about just daily mundane things that could potentially take away from your profitability or your effectiveness. Compliance with laws and policies. Hopefully you're seeing that it's difficult for somebody in this role to do all of these things, because there are a lot of hats that are put on this person. But a good internal auditor is going to stay up on changes in laws and regulations. They're going to be subscribed to the journals. They're going to be following alerts and updates, not only at a state level, a federal level, an industry level. They're going to want to stay abreast of the things that are changing, so that they look at the things that you're doing as an organization and help you prepare for that and coordinate that. That's one of the many hats that an internal auditor will wear. And then finally, financial statement accuracy. I've seen companies where they have a small internal audit staff, and they're responsible for all these things. They're responsible for financial statement reviews. They're responsible for laws and regulations, operational effectiveness. It's a lot. And we want to optimize them. We want to get them working in the best areas for our business, and taking a look at who they are, what their skill sets are, what the needs of our organization are. It's very, very important to make sure that it's as effective as possible. And so what type of person are you going to want to look for? If you're a small company and you're thinking at this point, man, who would I hire to do this? We haven't had an internal auditor before, and we're getting to the point that I think this would be beneficial for us. How do I find one? Who is somebody? A small company may not go out and hire a certified internal auditor right out of the gate, but look internally at the people from within who know your business, because you're looking for people who have communication skills. They're able to communicate not only with a board member, but also someone in an operational capacity. And so they have to be good communicators of issues and explain the why behind what they're doing so that people can understand. They're going to have some information technology familiarity, because today so many of the controls relate to that, and without that element of their skill set, they're just not going to be effective in the internal audit role. They have to be analytical in their mindset. They're going to be looking at a lot of data. That previous screen showed us so many areas that they're responsible for and that they could potentially work in. how do you keep up with that? You've got to have a really good system of collecting the data and analyzing it and reporting on it to the people who need to know it. And so I would encourage you to look around internally and say, okay, is there somebody who can take on this role for us that knows our business, that knows our company, that knows our processes, and has developed a cross-functional capability there? I've seen companies who have taken someone from accounting and turned them into this because they had that IT acumen and they had that business knowledge. I've seen it the other way. People from IT and data analytics who have gone into this, and I've just seen people who were working in the HR department, and they demonstrated an acumen for this. And so if you're a small company looking, I would lean towards someone who understands the business first, because you're going to find that that's very, very important for the internal audit role. If you are a bigger company that has that internal audit function, you want to audit the skill set that you have on the team. You may have specialization. You may have people who deal with unique areas, and they don't cross over into all of them. But you want to make sure that your team is well-rounded, that they all have good communication skills, but that all of these capabilities are covered by each and every member on your team, and identify where you have a weakness, where you have a hole. And the larger places may look for a very experienced internal auditor, someone who is certified, someone from the industry who has demonstrated their skill and expertise, and you may beef up your team that way in order to optimize internal audit. I know for us, I just want to share one little story here that, I'm a fan of hiring from within. And when you notice that quality of someone, if you can give them that goal or aspiration, hey, I need you to learn this and this, because that's going to make you so much more valuable. And, you can get into these areas and move into audit or, some data analytics role or something like that. Give people a challenge, give people a goal, and they will achieve it when you do that. So let's talk a little bit about strengths and weaknesses and the comparison of internal versus external. The strength of internal audit is that they are closely aligned with your business objectives. It is somebody in your company. They know what you're about. They know where you're going. They understand the industry issues, and it's very, very important to have that background. And you just can't replace that. An external auditor can't come in and know all of the things that an internal auditor does. So you leverage that strength. This is our internal expert, and this is someone who understands what we're doing so that they can compare it against the best practices that are out there and help make us even better after that. They're experts in your unique business rules and applications because they know you, they know your terminology, they know your systems, they know the applications and utilities that are involved and all the little interconnections between things. I was on a call this week with a client that we have audited for years, and we were discussing a new type of compliance framework that they were pursuing, and it came up again about that box in that room. And we all know what we're talking about, because there's this box in this room there that I've never been able to figure out what it does. And the internal people there are like, yes, this is our secret sauce. This is our application that runs these different tools and scripts and algorithms in order to produce the outputs that they do in their business. And I don't think I'm ever going to fully understand how that works or what it does, but the internal people do. That's their strength, is understanding that they can spend more time with it and provide more valuable insight as an internal auditor. And then finally, another strength for internal audit is because they know the business so well. They know the histories. They know the personalities. They know the relationships. So, oh yeah, Bob ran over Jane's cat 20 years ago. Jane has never forgiven Bob for that. And so there's some animosity there. You can't have them in the same room. And that history just really serves you well in knowing how to proceed on an audit issue, and somebody external isn't going to know that. And internal audit can navigate some of those issues because of the histories that live there. Now, some of the weaknesses of internal audit is first that tunnel vision can develop. And this is one of the things that we get a lot. I talked earlier about how we're viewed sometimes as auditors. Don't like to see us coming. Nobody wants to go through an audit. It's like the IRS. It's like going to the dentist. But one of the things that is my number one pet peeve these days is that we come in as an external auditor and we find something and the internal people did not know about it. They didn't find it. And the pet peeve is when people then blame us for that. They're like, wow, well, you're doing something different. You're not supposed to be finding that. We don't believe that that's a problem. We didn't know that. And then can we just make that a recommendation and talk about that next year? It's like people go into this denial mode and this defensive mode on some type of a finding from audit. Well, why didn't the internal audit person find it? Why didn't the internal operational staff know about it or recognize it? It's because we get tunnel vision and we're not looking at things from the perspective that an outsider can have. And so that's a weakness of the internal viewpoint. You're in your world and you don't look at it from the other side. You're used to looking at it this way. I've literally had people tell me in audits when, maybe we'll try an entry that you're not supposed to try in an application, and it causes the application to spit out different output. And you point that out and they say, yes, but you just don't do that, and then you won't have the problem. And then you get into this conversation about, well, yes, but we should change the controls so that it doesn't even allow that to happen. Whereas their answer is, no, just do things like we do every day. Just do things routine, and then there's no problem. But that's a weakness of internal audit, is to not look at things with that fresh perspective. Sometimes it's difficult for people internally in internal audit to maintain, up-to-date information, things that are current, things that are issues. They're so busy, they're so overworked, they have so many responsibilities that they don't have the time to get out and learn something new or see things that are changing. And so that's a weakness for internal audit is to not be able to stay up on these trends and issues that develop. A lot of times what I see, especially in the big companies with internal audit departments, is they are lacking in staff and resources. They don't have enough people. They don't have the technology that they need. And so as a result, they're just restricted from adopting new techniques and trying different things because we just don't have the financial ability to do that. We don't have the working power to do that. And so that can be a weakness for internal audit as well. And then finally, their voice can just lose influence. I've seen that so many times. A very common phrase that we get from an internal auditor when we go in as an external party to do an audit is, I've been telling them this for years, but they don't listen to me. I'm glad you found this. I'm glad you're putting it in your report because it's been in my report for 5 years and it's been ignored. And sometimes it does become mundane, it does become routine, and internal audit can lose their influence. So we always need to look at that and how we can shake that up in order to not allow that weakness to overcome us. And so now as we start to compare internal audit versus external audit and thinking about how we can leverage both to their optimum power, let's talk about the strengths of external audit. First of all, independence and objectivity should be a strength of your external auditor. While an internal auditor is trying to maintain that and trying to keep their mindset straight, it's more difficult for objectivity to exist there. And so you feel really good about an external person coming in from that standpoint, because you're like, okay, we're going to get a fresh look here. We're going to get a true third-party opinion on what we're doing and how we're doing it. And so that should occur. I saw a message today from one of my auditors that was on site with a client, and he was talking about how he brought up to the client that he found XYZ, and it was kind of a big issue. And the executive on the other side of the desk smiled and said, I would have been bothered if you hadn't found that. And so he knew about it, but he hired the third party, us, because he wanted to know, will they find this? Will they see this? Is this something that somebody on the outside can find? I really believe getting that objective opinion is a strength from a third party like that. You also should find that your external auditor is a true subject matter expert. Sometimes when an internal person doesn't have the ability to go out and get educated or certified in a particular area because they have such a broad focus and they have such a large workload that they can't really specialize on any one thing, you'll find that your external auditor can be a truly expert in the particular subject that you're hiring them to do, whether it's financial or IT or privacy or information security or whatever it is. You should be able to find one who that's their particular strength, is that they are a top contributor to that space, and they can come in and really give you something new and give you some new guidance and some things that you haven't heard before. That should be a strength of whoever you hire for an external audit. All of those things together that I've just talked about will bring enhanced credibility with your partners and your stakeholders. Everybody knows that it's just that way. I can have a report signed by my internal auditor and show it to a client, but having a report signed by an external auditor just automatically brings some additional credibility. And so having that external audit to complement what we're doing internally is very, very critical, because third-party stakeholders will want that. They will put more emphasis on that and understand the role of external audit in that particular case. And then finally, another strength of external audit is just the wide array of resources that are generally available to external auditors. I know when I go into an engagement, I'm not an expert on everything. And if something comes up that is an issue or a question, I have 100 people at this company that I can reach out to and find someone who's more knowledgeable than me or can provide resources that I need. Beyond that, because of the associations and the groups that I'm in, I've got a wide network of people that I can reach out to when I have a question or a concern or need some additional info on a technology or a law or something like that. I have a lot of resources that I can turn to. And so your external auditor should be very resourceful in that way and have a very deep capability of finding answers to your questions and helping you deal with challenges. You'll find that person to be very, very resourceful. Then what are the weaknesses of external auditors? Number one is there's a lot of turnover with external auditors. It's hard to keep that same auditor. So whereas you might have the same internal auditor for a long period of time, they're loyal to your company, and they are growing with your company, and they've been there in various roles, and they've continued to advance, and you maintain that history. Sometimes it's hard to keep your same external auditor. In our industry, we travel so much, and it's a difficult job working with so many different clients and having to keep up with so many things. There's turnover that can happen. And so that's a weakness of an external auditor is you find that from year to year, the staff has to change. A big one that's a weakness is the unfamiliarity with the unique elements of your business. An external auditor should be hired because of their industry knowledge, but ultimately they're going to have to learn your unique issues, and they're going to have to learn about that box in that room, and they're going to have to, pick up on those unique controls that you've designed and the specific risks that you're facing and the mission that you're on, and that it's a learning curve. And so that's a weakness for external audits is to overcome that learning curve that you have. You have to learn about the personalities that you're working with. Sometimes you hire an auditor and they come in and they're just not a good fit, and you thought they were going to be a good fit. You thought you were going to work well with this external auditor, but then you were wrong, whereas with the internal people, you know them, you've already gone through that together. But now, starting with a new internal auditor, especially, you don't know what you're going to get. And sometimes people are worried about that. I love it when I get an email from a client, and I get one of these every now and then where a client takes the time to email me and say, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I loved working with your auditor. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I enjoyed the audit. It went really well, and we learned a lot, and a lot of good things came out of it. More often than not, people are, I hate going through the audit. I know it's necessary. I know we have to do it, but it's difficult to do. And so people have trouble sometimes warming up to the auditor, and that's just a weakness that comes with that particular role. And then finally, high cost. Not everybody can afford to bring in that auditor to come in and do those things. That's why we look internally to develop those independent capabilities. But it is additional cost. It is an investment in taking that step as an organization to have a third-party independent view on a particular aspect of our business. And so those are some weaknesses to consider as we compare internal versus external. And so let's finish up today with some tools that I would like to recommend that you think about that you could arm your internal audit staff with. First of all, I think it goes a long way to make sure that you communicate to them the criticality in their role. Make sure that they know what their role is and how it connects with business mission, because they need to be motivated and they need to understand the why of what they're doing. And sometimes you can get them good training on how to improve their communication, because they're doing this and it's a very difficult thing. And so getting them some practice and some training is very good. One time we had some training here from an FBI agent on interviewing and, how to interview and identify, with this person who might be nervous or uncooperative or whatever. In an interview, you have to break those walls down in order to get the information that you need. And that's an important skill set that you need to arm your auditors with. As you think about training, I know when I got started in auditing, the MIS Training Institute was kind of the go-to resource for auditor training. And they have a lot of courses that focus on training the non-technical auditor how to be, more of a technical auditor. So you might look at some classes there if that's what you have. If you have people that need to develop IT skills and, go from financial controls to IT controls, those worlds are blending more and more all the time. And I know they have some training that's very specific to that. You want to make sure that your auditors are well-versed in risk management, in fraud investigations. Again, depending on the industry that you're in, fraud can be a big, big concern, and you want to arm your people with the ability to detect those things and know what kinds of controls would be put into place and what kind of monitoring could potentially expose some of those fraudulent activities that you would be concerned about. You want to make sure that the training that you give your people certainly includes information about new laws and new regulations. There are a lot of free resources with your state attorney general, with some of the federal agencies that are out there, some commercial news groups, and email alerts that you can sign up for to keep you abreast of those things. I wanted to mention a course I took years ago through SANS called LEG 523. That's the Law of Data Security and Investigations. That course was excellent. It was more about data breaches and the different privacy laws and data breach laws around the world. Every company needs somebody to be the resident expert in that, and I found that course to be very good. And then SANS also has courses built around the CIS top 20 critical controls. And so if you're needing your auditors to get more technical and know more about cloud security and IT and other types of network and application layer types of controls, these courses that they have, SEC 440 and 566, are great courses for learning about some of the more critical controls and how to audit them. That's what I find particularly helpful about that particular course. And then the other thing that I see internal auditors lacking in is they need to be active in the local chapter for the IIA. You know, they can join that without being certified, and they can go to the state chapter meetings that they have and get a lot of really valuable help to enhance their role and their skill set in the organization. There are so many resources for various accounting practices that you want internal auditors to be monitoring. If you have web applications that your organization has built and hosted, you may want to get them trained on the OWASP model for that. That actually teaches you how to test those web applications and the critical controls that are there. Cloud security is one that I see internal auditors needing a lot of help in and a lot of training and awareness around. And lastly, look to the vendors. Whatever your technologies are that you have, the vendors will have a lot of best practices, testing guidance and recommendations for how to work with the tools and the products that you have purchased from them. And that's a great place for an auditor to learn about how to monitor and test those controls that you've put into place. I see that auditors today need a toolkit that allows them to do things like code review and web app testing and having a security scanner at their disposal where they can run a scan and see the results and identify the systems that are out there. They need to be the people who have access to the logs so that it's kept separate from the IT operational staff, so that everyone is kept honest there on some of the critical activities that are happening. And some of those alerts need to go to the internal audit staff so that you can have that separation of duties. And so if anybody has any questions or needs any guidance on any of these tools or trainings that I've mentioned, I would love to point you in the right direction, give you a link, answer your question about something specific that you're wanting to arm your internal auditor with. I love sharing information like that. And so I'm going to encourage you to reach out to me if you want any more specifics on any of these ideas about tools that I think that they need. We, Ashlyn, if you would, since we're out of time, I want you to go to the very last slide and put my email address up there, because that is joseph@KirkpatrickPrice.com. And I would ask you to just email me there with your questions. And if you do need any help or additional details on some of those ideas that I threw out there, I'm happy to share that. So thank you very much for joining today. Our time is up, and you will receive a link to the recording. And do check out our website, because we've got a lot of great articles out there about building internal audit programs within your organization. So we hope we can help you in that if you need it. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for joining us, guys. There is going to be a very brief survey at the end, if you don't mind filling that out for us. Otherwise, please stay tuned for our final webinar, which will be happening towards the end of March. So stay tuned for email updates about that. And thank you again so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.